how are you? I hope you guys are having an amazing day today. Hello and welcome to Glowmas. Pardon this little bit of a random setup. We're setting up the filming room right now, and this is just a corner of my office. I don't know what else to do, so we're in here. But today's video, we are going to be filming the evolution of James Charles. Now, I feel as if this has been a long time coming. I actually almost filmed an evolution of James Charles a while ago, kind of when I was doing the evolution ofs a lot more frequently, because obviously he is one of the biggest beauty creators on the platform, and I thought he would be an interesting one to cover just in terms of kind of the evolution of his content / the evolution of his scandals. But obviously now a lot has changed since that sort of last time I was going to be filming this. So today I wanted to sit down and not only break down sort of the evolution of James Charles and his content, because I do think there's some things to be said there. I also want to break down sort of the evolution of the James Charles scandal, because I also think that he is one of the, not first YouTubers, but he was definitely a prominent YouTuber that started utilizing scandals as a way to sort of boost his career. So I want to talk about all of that today. And I think some people might be a little upset, not upset, but I think some people might have criticism of covering someone like James Charles this in depth and talking about him this in depth and almost giving him that attention. And I do hear that criticism. However, I think that having kind of everything that has happened with James Charles in one concise video is going to be a benefit for especially people who maybe had no idea any of this happened. I always think that having information out there is just the best way to go. So that's why I'm making the video, but I understand if there's some like criticism for stuff like that. Remember when I made my Jeffree Star Cosmetics video, some people felt like I shouldn't have been giving him the time of day. And I do understand that, but I feel like with the way that YouTube is going and the way that things are getting, especially like these scandals and these situations that keep happening, with the way that they're getting more serious, I don't think it's a benefit to like not talk about it. I think it's actually a hindrance to not talk about it. Before we jump into this video, today's video is sponsored by Way, so let's roll to that. Hi friends, editing me here, and today's video is sponsored by Way. Now you guys know that I love Way hair care. I have been talking about them nonstop for the past few months, and today I wanted to share with you some of my favorite things from the brand. I feel like with the winter months, it's really easy to let your hair get super dried out. I know mine in particular really suffers from getting very, very dry and very sort of frizzy this time of year, just because all of the dry air is like sucking the moisture out of it. So the first product I want to talk about is something I use to sort of combat that. That is the Way hair oil. Okay, this is my second bottle. I love this stuff. I put this in my hair after I wash my hair and like get out of the shower, pretty much, not every single day because I don't wash my hair every day, but I would say like every other day I wash my hair, and I use this as soon as I get out, and it just gives my hair such a smooth and nice finish. I feel like I was always really afraid of hair oils because my hair is definitely a little bit more thin, and so sometimes oils would tend to make my hair look really greasy, like I have too much product in it. But with this, I find you just need a couple of pumps, and like my hair is really long, and I just need like a couple of pumps and I am good to go. It makes my hair feel silky smooth and super shiny. Also, because of the cold weather, it's been really nice to use like a singular pump. Like, don't use too much, but I take like one tiny little pump, rub it together really well, and then sometimes I put it in my dry hair after I've already styled it. So like I did it today, I had this like half up, half down pony, and I noticed that my hair was just a little bit not as shiny as I wanted it to be. So just like a tiny little bit of this in dry hair can give you that really nice, healthy hair, shiny look that you're striving for. So I've been loving this stuff as it gets cold. I also want to talk about the Way texturizing hairspray. This stuff is bomb. I, again, have very thin hair, so sometimes it's very hard for my hair to hold curls, or even if it does hold the curl, it'll just look sort of flat and sort of like not be as voluminous as I would want it. This hairspray, not only does it hold in the curls without making my hair that sort of crunchy feeling that other hairsprays give me, but it also adds so much volume and just bounce to my hair in such a nice way. I cannot speak highly enough about this product. I have been loving it. And then the final thing is the heat protectant spray. I talked about this a few months ago and it's still something I really like using. I wasn't using a heat protectant spray before using this. For the last, I would say like 2 years, I didn't really style my hair very often with hot tools. I wasn't really using curling irons or straighteners or even like blow dryers that frequently. But now that I've been taking a lot better care of my hair and have also been more invested in trying to like style it, this has been a lifesaver. This really helps protect your hair from all of the really harsh heat that can come from using things like curling irons and straighteners. And this is kind of an integral step now. If I'm gonna be styling my hair with hot tools, I always use this. And I find that it just makes my hair feel a little bit stronger after using those types of products. Additionally, honorable mention to the Way body wash. I got my husband into it too. He loves it. He never liked body washes other than like Dove's, but he's obsessed with this one. It's just a really nice, clean scent that feels so good and so luxurious when you use it. Gives you an amazing lather. It makes you smell really nice after. I've also been loving that. It's in my shower right now. I've been loving that product. To discover a new way of life with cruelty, sulfate, and paraben-free hair care, check out theouai.com and use code SMOKY for 15% off your purchase. That is theouai.com and use code SMOKY. Thank you so much to Way for sponsoring this video and also just for helping rejuvenate my hair. I started using their products back in 2020 before they were even a sponsor, and it's like changed my hair game. I feel like it's even noticeable to you guys who have been watching the channel. You comment on my hair a lot now, how it looks shinier and healthier, and I really accredit their products to that. So thank you so much for sponsoring this video, and let's jump back into the content. So over the past few years, James Charles has had some of the most drastic highs and lows of literally any YouTuber ever. Like, I cannot think of another YouTuber who has had as high of highs and as low of lows as him. He's basically flip-flopped since the start of his career between being one of the most prominent figures in the beauty space and on YouTube to being completely blacklisted by his community to being yet again the most prominent person on YouTube to then going back to being blacklisted multiple times. Today I really want to dive into all of the James Charles scandals, but on top of that I want to dive into his content and kind of explore how he got so prominent in the first place. Because James Charles, whether you love him or don't, which I don't, just to make that clear off the bat, whether you love him or not, he has had this incredible rise through YouTube fame where he went from 0 subscribers to about 24 million in the span of only a few years, which is very impressive. So I think going through and kind of exploring his rise to the top and also exploring how that sudden fame is what kind of ended his career in a way, I think is going to be really interesting. So James Charles actually uploaded his very first YouTube video on March 3rd of 2016. It was a blue and brown eye serpent makeup tutorial. That's what it's called. And while technically this was the first YouTube video that James ever posted, it was most certainly not his first time posting on social media. He actually had a lot of followers on Instagram prior to making a YouTube channel, which actually is one of the main reasons that he started making his YouTube videos, because his followers on Instagram wanted to know how he made his look. Started posting on Instagram in 2015, and his first few pictures were actually not even of him. They were of his friends. He later said that he was really nervous to be a boy in beauty and to post his own makeup looks at the time. So he felt much more comfortable having some of his female friends come over and like doing their makeup and then posting pictures of them. He said that he was always the one the girls in his high school would go to. If it was like prom or there was a dance they were all going to, everybody wanted to get ready at his house because he would do their makeup. However, in September of 2015, James actually posted his very first picture that actually had him in it, and it was a skull inspired makeup look. I think it was supposed to be kind of for fall spooky vibes. I find this picture to actually be really interesting, mostly because I think it kind of perfectly sums up how James has always felt about makeup. James has said this in the past, but he has always been more of a sort of makeup is purely artistry type of person and not necessarily a like everyday glam type of person. His relationship and view on makeup is very different from a lot of other people's, especially in the beauty space. And this first post is really sort of solid on that. Like, it shows that from the beginning, he kind of had a love for makeup artistry instead of kind of just like makeup for everyday use. Now, for the rest of 2015, James posted on Instagram almost every single day a different photo of himself. He said many times in interviews and also in videos that he's done that he would come home from school and pretty much start doing his makeup right when he got home and then stay up all night just creating different makeup looks in his bedroom. He definitely was not the most technically amazing makeup artist to start, but you could tell that over time, especially if you look at his photo progression, he was getting progressively better. And you could also tell that he had a lot of creativity when it came to makeup. Like, most people when they first start out aren't attempting to do like graphic eyeliners or graphic lipstick, and he was really at least attempting to do all of those things, even if it technically was not the best. As you sort of get into the end of 2015 and into 2016 on his Instagram, you can see that the pictures start really increasing in quality. They start just being better production value. They're obviously shot on a real camera. He has like a real backdrop, and you can also tell that he started to learn how to sort of edit his photos. And that's no shade. A lot of influencers edit their photos, but you can tell very clearly the sort of shift between him not editing his photos and him then editing his photos. And that does come into play a little bit later, so that's why I'm mentioning it. But you can tell that the photos start being a little bit more high edited, but also they're just higher quality and higher production value. This again, I think really speaks to the way that James has always had this sort of passion for making his quality the best it possibly can be. James is one of those YouTubers that has always been continually reinvesting in his content and his channel. And it even shows on his early Instagram days that I think he knew this could be something for him, like there could be a career in this. And so it's obvious that he took sort of what he was doing and just tried to elevate it to the next level to improve his content. Also, just a little interesting thing is that James, before all of like this Instagram stuff even happened, like years prior, had uploaded a bunch of videos of himself singing on YouTube. He was doing covers. My favorite one is the Pumped Up Kicks one. But singing has always been a massive part of the sort of James Charles brand and career. And even in these early Instagram days, he was posting covers of music, posting himself singing videos. Like, music has always very much been a part of his brand the same way that makeup has been. So that's sort of his rise on Instagram. He has like a few thousand followers on Instagram. He's doing decently well. He started getting sent certain products and getting PR, and his followers really wanted him to start a makeup YouTube channel because they wanted to be able to learn how to do makeup from James. I think what's really interesting is that James says at first that he was not really invested at all in YouTube. He was much more invested into Instagram, and you can tell that in his early content. It's a little bit more sort of slapped together. It's a little bit more sort of silly editing and like not taking it too seriously. And also you can just tell with his posting schedule. The first 3 videos he posted were pretty much back to back, but then he basically abandoned the channel for like 3 months. Whereas on Instagram, he was still posting regularly. So you could tell from the beginning, he didn't necessarily see YouTube as his sort of route to the top. Throughout the rest of 2016, James was posting, honestly, just really sporadically. He wasn't posting super regularly on YouTube. And even when he did, it was really just makeup tutorial based content, which actually it seems like those videos were doing pretty well views wise. That was probably partially because makeup tutorials in 2016 were a lot more popular than they are now in the beauty space. I would say the other reason is probably that he was a boy in beauty, which at the time there were not a ton of boys in beauty the way there are now. And I would additionally say that because he had all of those followers on Instagram, they sort of followed him over to YouTube, which gave him a little bit of a head start in the YouTube space. They say on YouTube the hardest part is hitting your first 1,000 subscribers. So the fact that James had this sort of built-in audience that he was able to carry over to YouTube probably really helped him in that first year because he was able to sort of hit a few thousand subscribers relatively quickly. Now, James was kind of doing his thing 2016, posting on Instagram, posting a little bit more regularly on YouTube, and both of those were doing really well for him. Like, he was slowly gaining traction on both platforms. However, James Charles actually got famous. I feel like a lot of people don't remember this. The main reason he got super famous at first was actually because of a viral tweet that he put out. Despite all of his content being very on trend and like timely, he did not really make a name for himself in the beauty space until this viral photo happened. Basically, James posted a tweet where he had a picture of him, just like a normal yearbook photo with him, and he has like really intense highlight and he has really good makeup on. And then another picture where he's he's like applying highlighter in a photo and a person is standing behind him with like the thing like James Charles yearbook photo or whatever. And he tweets out these two pictures side by side and basically was like, when the photographer lets you bring your ring light in for senior portraits and you're just super extra, like something along those lines. I'll put the tweet up right here. But this tweet went super viral, like tons of impressions. It not only went viral on Twitter, but it also went viral on Instagram. It went viral on Facebook. I remember seeing this picture and this tweet everywhere in the fall of 2016. Like this was blowing up for him. I think looking back, it's super fascinating to know that like this tweet really launched James Charles's career. Like that's kind of an unusual story. For most people, they're not launched into stardom because of like a viral meme or a viral moment. That's a very unique experience. Most YouTubers have like one sort of viral video that started it all for them. But the fact that what started James Charles's social media career was literally just like one viral tweet is crazy to think about. It also really speaks to the way that the internet has such a broad reach. You never really know when you tweet something or say something online who is going to see it. And in this case, CoverGirl saw James's tweet. So very shortly after this tweet went viral, James was contacted by CoverGirl and they offered to make him their very first cover boy. Now, this was a massive milestone for the beauty brand because they had never had a male CoverGirl before. It had always just been basically white women up until that point. So them picking James Charles, who was a boy in beauty, to be the new face of the brand was a huge deal. And on top of that, James landing this deal opened up a ton of different opportunities for him. He was on the Ellen show. He got to do a YouTube video with Zendaya, and his YouTube channel and Instagram started growing at really rapid rates because people were being so exposed to him and his story. And I think his story was very compelling. I mean, he talked about the fact that he grew up in a smaller town in Albany, New York, which is like coincidentally 2.5 hours from where I live. He talks about, I grew up near Albany. Nobody in his high school really did makeup. He would sometimes get bullied for using makeup, and he wanted to kind of express himself and be who he was. I mean, it was an inspiring story. It inspired a lot of people. One thing I think that sucks about what ended up happening with James Charles is that for a while there, he really was an amazing role model for boys in beauty. Like he was the face of a major beauty brand. He was incredibly successful on his social media careers, and he was thriving as a boy in beauty doing his makeup and showing that makeup does not have to be for specifically one type of person. It can be for literally anyone. Now, as James's star sort of started growing, he was still posting very regularly on YouTube, but again, all of these videos were very much just tutorial based. Like 2015 to 2016, there was no real change in content. It was mostly just him either reviewing brand new hyped up makeup launches or showing tutorials on how to do makeup looks like he did. Now, I think it's important when you talk about James Charles especially to really talk about sort of the earlier scandals, because I really think that all of these scandals sort of paved the way for what his career was going to be. There's a lot of conversation around James in particular of sort of, did the fame make him what he turned into, or was he already kind of like that before he got famous and the fame just made it worse? And I think if you were asking me my sort of like hypothesis on like what came first, the chicken or the egg in this situation, my sort of theory on the entire situation is basically just that James was kind of always problematic, was always a little bit messy, and also was always a little, not full of himself, but kind of. I feel like that's the best way to put it. Like, I think because of his behavior from the start of his career up until where we are now, it's very clear that he was always very sort of overly confident in himself to a point where it was almost a detriment to his personality. I think the very first sort of scandal that James Charles got into was the Ebola scandal. So in February of 2017, which it's crazy. I think it's because he's so young still, because even now he's only, I think, 22. It's crazy to think about how not long ago this was. Like, it's nuts to think about the fact that 2017 was like not really that long ago in the grand scheme of things. He was like basically an adult at this point. It's just nuts. Anyway, in February of 2017, James was going on a school trip. It was his senior trip to South Africa. And right before leaving, he tweeted, "I can't believe we're going to Africa," in quotes, I can't believe we're going to Africa today. OMG, what if we get Ebola? And then somebody else, presumably it was like quoting a friend, said, James, we're fine. We could have gotten it at Chipotle last year. So obviously, super racist to like a multitude of levels. Super racist to assume that because you're going to Africa, that means that you could contract a disease. Like, the continent of Africa has so much more to offer than just Ebola. And it's just incredibly to perpetuate that. Now, James got into some hot water for this tweet for a lot of reasons, but I think also his initial response was what really put people off. He tweeted this right before getting on a plane for like 10 hours. So he was on the plane as people were sort of finding out about this tweet. And then when he got off the plane, that's when he deleted the tweet. And that's when he sort of issued a non-apology. At first, he basically tried to take the stance that everybody was just way too sensitive about everything. And then he started saying he was just going to be blocking people and moving on. He said he was glad he wasn't going to have cell service for 10 days while he was in South Africa, because that meant he wouldn't have to deal with Twitter. And then he sort of reflected for a while, I guess while he was on the trip, reflected, and ended up posting a more proper apology on his Instagram and Twitter that basically just said he had learned a lot over the past 10 days while being in South Africa, and that he was sorry and apologized for the way that it was offensive, and that he understood now why it was offensive. And I think for the most part, now that this tweet and this issue kind of flew under the radar, because it still gets brought up a lot, and at the time there was really intense scrutiny over these comments, as there should have been. But I think the real reason that this didn't blow up as much was because at the time, he definitely was a smaller creator. At this time in 2017, he hadn't even hit 1 million subscribers yet. So even though he was the face of CoverGirl, and he was obviously a very prominent figure in the beauty space just because of sort of his mainstream exposure, he also wasn't one of the like biggest creators on the platform. So I think that a lot of the criticism from this sort of flew under the radar and went away very quickly. However, James did lose his CoverGirl deal very, very quickly after this tweet happened. CoverGirl actually tweeted out basically that they did not support or stand behind James's statements. They were glad he issued an apology, but that his words did not reflect the brand. And then shortly after, all of the social media and marketing around him was removed, and he was no longer the face of CoverGirl. And kind of to add insult to injury, pretty much immediately after this tweet happened, Thomas Halbert, who is another sort of YouTube, Instagram beauty guru, who was also kind of in the same realm as James at the time. The two of them were actually friends, but I guess James had unfollowed Thomas Halbert at some point in time, and like they weren't really on speaking terms anymore, and Thomas found this out and was very offended by James not being friends with him on Twitter or like being friends with him in general anymore. So he decided to sort of expose something about James, which is that his school photos that he tweeted out in his viral tweet that sort of started all of this for him, those photos were not genuine. They were heavily edited. In the grand scheme of life, this is not that big a deal. But I think because this was coming very quickly off of the Ebola tweets and him sort of losing his CoverGirl sponsor, I think that it was just really annoying to people. Like, it was annoying to people that he literally lied and like went viral over a lie, essentially. Basically, Thomas showed screenshots of a conversation with James where James admitted that the photos were very heavily face-tuned, and that was the reason they looked the way that they looked, which, by the way, now I cannot believe that any of us thought they weren't face-tuned. Like back in 2016, it screams of face-tuned. It's not like a super well-edited photo. It's very obvious that it was face-tuned, but Thomas also shared side-by-sides of what the actual photo looked like and what James's photo looked like, and it was really clear that he heavily edited his sort of side profile to make his highlight appear a lot more brighter, which was kind of the biggest part of the picture that made people really like him and made it go viral in the first place. There was a lot of backlash from both the Ebola tweet and people finding out that sort of his come up was just a lie. Like, he basically just lied his way to where he was, and on top of that, he had done some really and problematic things. And I think what's interesting is that James, in a video he did with Tana Mojo, I think it was a like Q&A they did together, James actually talked about the fact that he almost left the internet during this time. He said that the hate and criticism was just really intense for him and he wasn't prepared to deal with it. And he also thought that his career was basically over after this incident happened. However, despite all of the drama and controversy, he still went on to hit 1 million subscribers in May of 2017, and pretty shortly after that hit 2 million subscribers. So even though all of this was going on, he was still actively posting just like a ton of content. He was uploading like 2 to 3 times a week. His videos were always really well edited and well produced. They were interesting, fun makeup tutorials. I think especially for people that were his age or a little bit younger, they were super informative. Truthfully, like if I'm being 100% honest, I think that this might have been the moment that James learned that he could absolutely capitalize off of drama and scandal. Because when CoverGirl dropped him and when Thomas Halbert exposed him, even though he was receiving massive backlash for his actions and what he did, his numbers don't lie. He was still actively growing. More people were figuring out who he was and more people were starting to see who he was. And that in turn was getting him traction. It's one of those sort of there's no such thing as bad publicity things. Because even though he was going through all of this, his sub counts and his follower counts were going up at a crazy rapid rate, despite him not really posting any different content than what he was posting before. It's been said by a lot of people who have been close to James Charles. Behind the scenes, James does openly talk about the fact that scandals have helped boost and make his career. And I would argue that again, this was one of those cases where he realized that even though he was in a lot of scandals and a lot of stuff was going on and he had made mistakes and was like facing repercussions for them, I think this is when he realized that being messy honestly had benefits, especially back in like 2017 YouTube, because it did back in 2017 YouTube. There's also a bunch of, and I'm gonna cover all of these in one swoop because they all happened between like 2017 and 2018. There is like a bunch of little celebrity feuds or like little dramas that he's gotten into that I think are really interesting and again paint the story of what I think was sort of happening, which was that I think James realized that even if he was in scandals and even if people were sort of like mocking him or mad at him, that was not a bad thing for him. He was still growing because during all of these scandals, he was still actively growing like a lot. So the first was the fight he had with the cast of It. James basically tweeted while he was in the theater watching the movie It that the movie was really bad. He has a blue check mark, so obviously some of the actors from the movie saw it and tweeted back at him like, why do you even have your phone out in the movie? A bunch of the actors were subtweeting him and very unhappy about this. James basically tried to make it into a joke that he was being canceled for not liking a movie. Honestly, looking back, I kind of agree with that. I feel like it's silly that just because he didn't like a movie, the actors were like literally subtweeting him, trying to like shade him for that. Like, I'll agree on that one. But James started egging on the situation when for Halloween that year, this was in like September, so in October of 2017, he posted a video of him sort of doing a Pennywise the Clown makeup tutorial. And in that video, he addressed the sort of drama and scandals, which in turn led a lot of the actors of the movie to subtweet him again and be like, imagine trying to profit off a movie that you actively talk shit about, which I can see the actor's perspective on that too. Like, I'm sure having someone with that type of social media following shitting on your movie is like not great. So I get that. But also, I think again, what this shows, as petty as this is, kind of what it shows is just the fact that I think what James learned from the Ebola comments and the Thomas Halbert stuff, that there was a way to profit off of drama, and the fight with the cast of It is like the perfect example of that. It would have been very easy for him to just like delete the tweets or apologize for being so harsh about the movie and like move on, but he egged on this sort of feud that he had with these actors for months, which in turn made people go and watch his videos, and some of those people subscribed to his videos. He also got into some trouble in 2017 when he made some comments about Ariana Grande. He was filming a video with Shane Dawson and Rylan Adams, and in that video, he was asked who the rudest celebrity he had ever met was, and he said Ariana Grande. He basically said that Ariana Grande had been following him on Twitter, and then a bunch of her fans found out she was following him, and because of the tweets that he had made, her fans told her that he had said these things, and then she unfollowed him. And that was the reason that she was the rudest celebrity he'd ever met. Which again, I feel like this is why I'm not trying to be annoying, but like, remember at the beginning I said I had this like hypothesis that I feel like he's always just been like this. That is like reason, this was back in like 2017 that he said this. This is like reason number a million that I think he's just kind of always been like this, and the fame just made it worse. Because I can't imagine the gall of feeling like Ariana Grande owes me a Twitter follow despite the fact that I've actively been racist. Like, I Anyway, and then to call her out in a video because she unfollowed you and say she was the rudest celebrity you've ever met because she just unfollowed you because she became aware of new information about you. Anyway, James Charles also got into some, not really drama, but I think it is important to mention. Basically, Shawn Mendes, who is a singer, songwriter person, he was live on Instagram and he was juggling, I guess, on Instagram Live. And James basically made a very sexual comment towards him in the Instagram Live. A lot of people felt like this was really inappropriate, and honestly, so do I. I always think that comments like that towards celebrities, regardless of whether you're like a man to a man, a woman to a woman, a man to a woman to a man, like I always think the comments that are like really overly sexualizing a person are just not really appropriate. Like you see things, especially all the time on like TikTok, where you'll open the comments and people are like, oh my God, hit me with a truck. Oh my God, step on me. Like comments like that, I just feel like are a lot. And I don't feel like any public figure should have to deal with comments like that because they're just very aggressive and overly sexualized. So James got in some hot water for that because people were kind of like, don't speak to him that way. And then there was a rumor circulating at the time that Shawn Mendes had been like talking shit about James Charles at a party. Shawn Mendes later reached out to James and told him that that wasn't true and that like he didn't mind the comment. And James shared those DMs to let people know. But even still, I think again, this is a good example of sort of the way that James has always been very sort of just like aggressively forward. And not that he's the only person on the internet to ever do that. There's a lot of people that do that. I think that pattern of behavior of being overly flirtatious on the internet has definitely gotten him into some drama and some trouble. He also got into some drama when he attended DragCon in 2017. Basically, a video went viral of James trying to skip the line at a meet and greet for one of the drag queens. And the drag queen is basically like, hey, you can get in line. And he's like, I'm James Charles. So basically the drag queen, whose name is Latrice, she was basically like, okay, James Charles, there's a line. And then James kind of continued to be like, oh, but I'm James Charles, so like I need to cut the line. And then Latrice let him cut the line and like take a picture, but was obviously very uncomfortable. Again, this was obviously a very bad look. The other reason that this was particularly bad was that James Charles was literally supposed to have a meet and greet at DragCon, which he canceled on that day. So the fact that he canceled on his meet and greet because he was allegedly sick and then cut in line to meet one of his favorite drag queens was just like a very bad look. He went on to say that he only went to DragCon for a couple of hours and that even though he didn't have enough energy to do a meet and greet, he still wanted to meet some of his like favorite queens in the drag space. But again, I bring this up not because I think it's like the worst sin in the world to cut in line, even though I do think that that's a terrible thing to do. I hate people who cut in lines, but I don't think it's like the worst thing in the world. I more so bring that up because again, I want to support this theory because I think that a lot of people think that fame turned James Charles into who he was and who he is. And I think a lot of people blame sort of influencer culture and the LA culture and everything like that. And honestly, I also used to do that. Like I also used to blame influencer culture and flex culture and toxic whatever culture for kind of turning James Charles into this person that was really just like, I don't know a better way to say it other than just like really bad. Like I used to blame the culture because I always was like, well, if I was 17, I'm sure that I would also get an inflated ego. I'm sure that I would also get a big head, like trying to almost defend a lot of his actions. And I think a lot of times we almost excuse James Charles's behavior because we're like, well, that could have been anyone. If anybody was that popular at 18 years old, that could have been any of us. And I think the problem is that it probably wouldn't have been any of us. I think that James shows a really strong pattern of behavior of being this type of person even before he was incredibly famous or had a ton of money. And I think he has always had a very strong sense of entitlement about him that has always been a problem. Now, as far as James's content from 2017 to 2018, I think what's really, really interesting about his content is that he has always sort of understood the value of a YouTuber collab. And not only collaborating with other beauty gurus, but James was really, really adamant about collabing with people even not in the makeup industry or the makeup sphere. Like, he was collabing with people like Tana Mojo, Ryland and Shane. He had Elijah and Christine do his makeup. He had Maddie and Mackenzie Ziegler do his makeup. Like, he was having people from all different parts of the internet come and do collaborations on his channel. And I think even the Ace family was on his channel. They did like a beauty battle with him. I think he really knew from the beginning what a lot of YouTubers know, which is that collaborations obviously help cross promote. But I think what he really realized was that it wasn't necessarily beneficial to collaborate with another beauty guru, because you guys were probably already going to have a similar overlapping audience. I think he realized that by collaborating with people who were completely outside of the realm of what he normally did, he was going to be introduced to just a vastly different audience than he was before. And that was in turn going to help him outgrow other beauty gurus in the space. While he was definitely still posting these makeup tutorials, he was also starting to get a little bit more creative with his makeup content. I would say in 2017, 2018, that's when sort of, I don't want to say the tutorial on YouTube like died, because it's definitely not dead. People still do tutorials and people still watch them, but I think they just started losing popularity a little bit. So James started to pivot his content a little bit to still be makeup based, but also be more makeup challenge based, if that makes sense. Like, he had this series called Beauty Battle where he would have two people, usually it was like Elijah and Christine or like Shane and Ryland, and they would both do one half of his face at the same time and try to create their own makeup look. And they would have sort of conversations happening while that was happening. So it was still makeup based, but it was also more competition and challenge based. Also, I mentioned before that music has always been a very integral part of the James Charles brand, and that was still happening. In 2017, he started an a cappella group named Flashback, and the group was, I mean, relatively successful. They actually only posted a few covers before they stopped doing it completely. Nobody is really entirely sure what happened there. It seems like just some of the members didn't want to do it anymore. He was definitely still releasing covers and things that sort of revolved around music. And honestly, and this is not to take credit away from James, because I do think that James is a very creative person, and I think that's why his channel was able to thrive. But I also think that kind of a big thing that James did in the beginning that really helped him was, from the beginning, he always reinvested the money that he made back into his channel. So something he was doing that a lot of other beauty gurus weren't doing and still don't do was not only hiring like assistants or video editors, but he was also hiring people to help him like write scripts. He was hiring people to help him come up with video concepts. He basically was building a team around himself that their entire goal was to make his videos stand out and his videos seem unique, and for him to sort of have this concept and they were going to perfectly execute it for him. So I think because he had this really strong team behind him that was coming up with a lot of creative ideas and also helping him achieve the ideas that he had, he was able to be putting out content that was much more high quality and much more creative at a much faster rate than any other beauty gurus were doing. 2018 was when all of that started happening, and it was really a reinventive year for his channel. I think he posted like maybe 4 or 5 makeup tutorials and like different review videos, but for the most part, he was really focused on making this more creative, different content in the beauty space. And I think that that hard work paid off, because by September of 2018, James had hit 9 million followers. I do want to say, I know I'm sort of gassing up this content right now, but that's because it was good. Like, especially for 2018, this was like really good, high quality creative content in the YouTube space, especially the beauty YouTube space. While that was happening though, there were definitely some misses on his channel. He tried to do this series with his brother Ian called Brother and Sister that was structured sort of like a podcast, but it wasn't a podcast. There were like 6 minutes where they would like each have a topic and they would talk about the topic. It was edited really weirdly, and also they got in some trouble with the editing style that they chose for the videos because it kind of felt like a direct ripoff from another series on YouTube. I would say James's biggest dramas in 2018 actually did come from the accusations that he was ripping people off, and that he was ripping off editing styles, that he was ripping off merch ideas, that he was ripping off Instagram looks. He became really notoriously known for doing makeup looks for Instagram that were inspired by smaller artists and not crediting the smaller artists. Especially the crediting smaller artists things is really dicey, because a lot of times it was pretty cut and dry that he had like seen the post and then copied the person's makeup look exactly, but other times it was a little bit more up to interpretation. So I think that he got away with this a lot of the time by basically just being like, I just came up with this and it's just a coincidence. There was also the sister Squad in 2018, which was pretty short-lived, but I think this was the first time that James realized that having like a set friend group that his audience could invest in was going to be beneficial for him. The Sister Squad was basically the Dolan twins and Emma Chamberlain and James Charles. The four of them would always do sort of three-way collaborations together. So the Dolan twins would post a video on their channel, James would post one on his, and Emma would post one on hers. And these videos were always sort of super creative ideas that were picked for each channel really well. The Sister Squad is so interesting because I think it was a learning lesson for James Charles in how to make a friend group almost like a reality show for him and his fan base to get invested into. Like, people were very invested in this entire group. There was constant speculation that Emma Chamberlain and Ethan Dolan were dating, and that added a lot of views to any videos they were in. James and Grayson Dolan had this sort of like ongoing thing where like James would constantly be hitting on Grayson and Grayson would be like, no. And it was kind of like an ongoing joke in their friend group. I will say that James did get a lot of criticism at the time for the way that he would sometimes treat and talk to Grayson, because again, it was just a little bit uncomfortable on camera to see someone making advances at somebody who didn't want them. However, James and Grayson have both said that those sort of interactions were pre-planned and that they were always just more so for the camera because their fans seem to like it and like eat it up. But regardless, I think that this sort of trend of James having very famous friendships is something that really continued on throughout his channel. He would find sort of a friend group or friend that worked really well with his channel, and then he would constantly use those friends to promote and cross promote on his channel to get more engagement, which I don't think is a bad thing necessarily. Like, that's not like a James Charles specific thing. I think a lot of YouTubers do that. They'll have friendships that are a little bit more fabricated for the public eye. However, I think that after this started happening multiple times, and I think the Sister Squad was kind of the first example of this, I think people really started to question if these relationships and friendships were even genuine at all to begin with, or if they were mostly just kind of made for YouTube friendships. So at the end of 2018 is when things started really picking up for James. He hit 10 million subscribers and also launched a makeup palette with Morphe Cosmetics. The Morphe times James Charles palette was actually wildly successful, which is not really a surprise because at the time, it's not even that he was like the most subscribed to beauty channel, because there were other people who had more subscribers, but he was definitely one of the most talked about beauty channels at the time, so it made sense that this palette would be such a big deal. And also at the time in 2018, Morphe was a really, really popular brand. It kind of made sense that in 2018, this would be sort of a perfect collaboration. It ended up selling out in less than an hour, which is absolutely insane. And for a really long time, if you didn't get it on that initial launch day, they would do restocks, but it was still really hard to get your hands on. It was constantly sold out at Ulta, constantly sold out online, at the Morphe stores. Like, it was a really hard palette to get. And again, I think that this really large success sort of boosted James's ego a little bit. To his credit, I do think that he genuinely loves that palette because he has never stopped using it. Like, there was a probably 2-year period where he used that palette in every single video that he uploaded. There was not a time where he didn't bring up the Morphe and James Charles palette. He was always using it. I think that he genuinely loved it and thought that it was great. And to be fair, it was like a decent palette. I actually got it and reviewed it. I remember being so excited. I didn't have that many subscribers. I think I had like 15,000 subscribers. And I remember thinking it was gonna be like a huge video, and it actually was a big video for me, but I remember getting that palette the day it launched and like reviewing it, and it was like, okay. Shimmers were really bad. I maintain that, but like the mattes were okay. They were fine. But there was some scandals that came from this. The first big scandal that came from this was there's a channel on YouTube and on Twitter named Cody Rants, and they are basically a content creator who makes these rant videos. And Cody actually made a video after trying the James Charles palette and was upset because the palette stained their eyes and made their eyes super, super pink. James responded to this and basically just said that like they're pressed pigments, which means that like of course they're gonna stain your eyes, and like that's not really his problem. And I think the way that he responded to it kind of rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. Number one, he put a really small account, like it was like a small creator, sort of on blast. And number two, he never said in his video that any of the shades could cause staining. So I think people were rightfully kind of like, hey, maybe just like say that they can do that and then like move on. Don't like clap back at someone because they have any sort of criticism of this palette. That was sort of the general theme, honestly. The Cody Rant situation is a really good example of just like the general theme around that launch, which was that if there was any sort of negativity or there was any sort of criticism of his palette, James basically threw that away and was like, no, there's not. Like if anybody had anything negative to say about the palette or anyone had any sort of problems with it, James was really not susceptible to that criticism, which when you're putting out a palette to that large of an audience, not everyone is going to love it and not everyone is going to think that it's as amazing as you do. And instead of like bashing on that criticism, sometimes it's good to just sort of take that in and like internalize it for maybe your next launch. At one point too, James put out a tweet where he basically implied that everybody who was giving negative reviews to his palette were only doing so to get views, basically just lying and only doing it to get views, which again caused more controversy. And he also went on to say in multiple videos that this palette was like the best palette of all time or like the most successful makeup launch of all time. And again, I think that sort of cockiness really started making people kind of just like not canceling him or like mad at him, but I think it just made people annoyed by him because it kind of felt like he just thought that everything he did was the best thing on the planet and was susceptible to zero criticism. I think this was heightened at the end of 2018 when Marlene Estelle announced that she was working with Netflix on a documentary about the beauty community. James saw this tweet and was very, very mad. Like that's the best way to put it. Like he saw this tweet and he was really angry. He tweeted at Marlene and at Netflix essentially saying that this woman just had a failed makeup brand and she was not the person to be talking to and that Netflix should be talking to him. It has an unbiased outline of an entire docuseries. He later did apologize for these things, and also when he was actually doing a collaboration with Tati, which is ironic, he talked about this again sort of at length, and Tati basically told him that the way that he acted towards Marlena was inappropriate and that maybe it wasn't the best time or best idea for him to be making this like intensive multi-part docu-series about the beauty community. And then in early 2019, when he announced his sister's tour and announced that the tickets would be like $500 in order to meet him, people were also very upset about this. And I think it just further painted this picture that James had sort of gotten a very big head and was very egocentric. And I think that this was starting to turn a lot of people off to him, even his fans at that point in time. Besides all of this though, towards the beginning of 2019, James was starting to make waves in more mainstream media. He was invited to the Met Gala by YouTube, and his Met Gala look did get kind of roasted, but to be fair, I actually don't think it was that bad or that terrible. It wasn't great by any means, but it seemed like he was given a designer not really by his choice and just had to kind of go with whatever they put him in. Also during this time, like from the end of 2018 into 2019, his content was just getting bigger and bigger. He did videos like Zoo Animals Pick My Makeup. He did the makeup of Iggy Azalea and Jenna Marbles for videos. And he had also started a series on his channel called Messy Makeup Trivia, where he basically had two other beauty gurus and they played this sort of like makeup trivia game where if one of them got a question wrong, they could assign a hindrance to the other player. It was actually kind of a cool concept. Like I will say about this content, I think that James really did have interesting and fun concepts for his videos. And again, I think that's why so many people gravitated towards them, is because in the beauty space, he was always doing stuff that was just like a little bit different, which I think people thought was really cool. And then obviously right after the Met Gala happened, Bi Sister happened. I already made 2 videos really recently talking about the Bi Sister scandal in depth, so I'm not gonna go as in depth on this part. I feel like those videos do a good job covering all of that. But basically Tati Westbrook made a video calling out James Charles for doing a vitamin sponsorship with Sugar Bear Hair and sort of stabbing her in the back and supporting a competitor of her brand, Halo Beauty. James's initial response to this was really bad. He posted a video almost immediately where he basically, there was a lot of like stuttering and silence and crying and like apologizing to Tati, which I think made a lot of people think that he was guilty. On top of this, Jeffree Star started piling on to the drama, basically saying that James was a predator and that James was not allowed in his home for a very specific reason because he was a really sick individual. After After this, Tati made a video talking about why she posted the video in the first place and basically just sort of apologized to James and rescinded some of her comments. And James put out one of his probably most notable videos, which was called No More Lies, which I think at the time was seen as this sort of blueprint for how to address a scandal as a YouTuber. It provided a lot of receipts. There was no real like crying or anything like that. It was just all receipts. And then at the end of the video, more notably, he did acknowledge the fact that people were saying he had gotten a big head and a bigger ego and that he was starting to sort of abuse his fame. And he really agreed with those comments and said that he needed to be sort of put into check and that he was going to be internalizing them and changing his behavior. Now, after the Bye Sister video, James did leave the internet for about a month and a half. He posted that he was going to be canceling his sister's tour, and he actually never redid that tour. I'm probably assuming because of COVID, and now I would assume it's not going to happen because of everything that's kind of gone down, but anyway, I think after the Bye Sister scandal, James's content, while it still definitely revolved a lot around makeup, I think that it also started revolving more around his lifestyle and life. Like, he adopted a puppy, he started playing Minecraft and getting really into video games and showing like that side of himself. He started doing more cooking videos. He like bleached his hair blonde for an entire video. He started posting more videos with his friends and not just like people who were famous. He still did the people who were famous stuff, but like videos with his friends. And then at the end of 2019, James launched his second collaboration with Morphe, which was actually just a mini palette. It was like the same exact palette, it was just mini and it had a mirror. That was like the whole point of it. Honestly, at the time I roasted that palette, but to give credit where credit is due, it seems like James, because he was getting kind of so much flack for not taking criticism on the initial palette and not being willing to listen to any problems the palette might have, I think that this was a way to combat that. He acknowledged in this video that there was legitimate criticism of the design of the palette. Number one, that it was massive. It was so big. And number two, that it didn't have a mirror. So he wanted to sort of fix those things and give people the option of a mini palette with a mirror that kind of fixed some of the problems that people had been talking about. I think the sad thing is that over the course of 2019, after the Bye Sister scandal happened, the general consensus around James was that he had changed like a lot. Like, even I have talked about in videos, I have videos from 2019 where I literally was like, yeah, I think James has shown a lot of growth and made a lot of changes in his life. And I think that he's staying out of drama. And he kind of was on this path and trajectory of like not being so messy, not constantly jumping on Twitter and like calling people out. He wasn't always in scandals all the time. Like, he was more so just keeping to himself and posting his own content and wasn't outwardly in any real scandals for the most part. Like, there were some tweets here or there that were kind of dramatic, but after the Bye Sister scandal, I think the general sort of consensus amongst the internet was that James had changed for the better and that he had really matured and grown up and wasn't getting as involved in all of these different sort of petty dramas. Now, at the end of 2019, James announced that he was going to be launching his own YouTube original show that was going to be called Instant Influencer. Now, the launch video for this show was actually sort of the casting call video. He called for different makeup artists of all different sizes to put out videos explaining why they would want to be on Instant Influencer and sort of audition that way. And through that audition process, he found these 6 contestants. I will say Instant Influencer, it had a very high production value, but I don't think that James Charles was necessarily meant to be a host. I think the show in general would have been a lot better if maybe he was just like sort of the mentor of the show and less the host of the show. His comedy and hosting chops were not super great. And on top of that, the show itself, while like decent, I actually don't think it was a bad show. Honestly, I think that the contestants were good. I liked the fact that they picked actually small influencers to be a part of the show instead of picking people who had like millions of followers already. It was definitely a little bit weird at times. There were some off-putting challenges. Like, one of the challenges he literally had them do, it was like a mini challenge. He made them film a fake apology video where they were supposed to receive like what a mini scandal would be and they were supposed to apologize for it. Stuff like that was just kind of weird and off-putting. I think the show, while it had a good production value, definitely lacked in direction. It was just not really super clear to see what some of the challenges had to do with being an influencer. It was much more of a makeup competition than like an influencer competition. But like regardless, the show got pretty decent views and also was pretty well received. I think some people definitely thought that it was like a little bit immature, but I think for James's target demographic, which is younger people, I think the show is definitely a good fit for them. Now in 2020, obviously also COVID happened and James Charles got into a lot of hot water during COVID. I think this was a time when kind of the old tricks that he had used to grow his channel really started to become a problem. The biggest way that James created content and the biggest way that he grew his channel was by doing collaborations with different people. So obviously when the pandemic hit, it was kind of assumed that James would sort of stop that, but he didn't. He still did a ton of in-person collabs actively throughout the entire pandemic. I think I, and probably a lot of other people, would have been okay with all of this if James at the beginning of every video had been like, by the way guys, we both got tested before being in this room together, all of my team are wearing masks, and we're following sort of the standard LA protocol. But even at a time when like talk show hosts couldn't have audiences or couldn't go into their own studios, James Charles was still working out of his studio with his entire team and was collaborating with tons of different people. It felt like every week there was another collaboration with another person. And I think that this constant collaborating did start to make people feel really resentful of his channel and what he was doing. I also think if you look at the view counts on his videos, pretty much all of his biggest viewed videos are collaborations that he did with other people. Like he did some with Madison Beer, Charlie and Dixie D'Amelio, Addison Rae. He did another one with Kylie Jenner. It seemed like videos that really just had him in them, for the most part, did not perform as well on his channel, which I think is just super interesting. I don't know if I've ever seen another creator have to rely so heavily on collaborations before in order to like get views. If you really think about it, probably like 40% of his content and 40% of his views are all from these different collaborations and cross promotion that he got from other people. James also got into a lot of trouble in 2020 because he was seen going to different LA parties, and when called out for it, he gave a pretty subpar apology. There was even a video he did where he filmed himself for an entire day. It was sort of a day in the lifestyle video, and he filmed himself going to this birthday party, and then when he got backlash for going before the video was posted, instead of like scrapping the video and not posting it at all, he just cut out some of the clips where he was at the party and said that he like shouldn't have gone in the first place. I think that James's constant collaborations and going out was definitely sort of an ongoing problem during the pandemic, and I think that he was one of the influencers who was getting called out for it the most, simply because he was breaking COVID protocol the most, and that was definitely troubling, especially considering he has a very young fan base who he had the opportunity to influence to like stay home, don't meet up with your friends right now, like it's not super safe to do so. And instead he was doing the exact opposite of that. Some of the worst ones he did were the Among Us videos. He made 2 of them where basically he had large groups of people come to his house to play Among Us. And this was like before there were vaccines readily available, before rapid tests were super popular. He was just gathering with super large groups of people to play games with them, basically. I also think it's really interesting that James started utilizing TikTok a lot more in his content, and not even just TikTok, but TikTokers. Like TikTok trends became a very large part about what he was doing. He started sort of losing the YouTube crowd of people he had once hung out with and was way more focused on hanging out with his TikTok friends. He actually sort of recreated the Sister Squad with 5 new people. It was Dixie D'Amelio, Charlie D'Amelio, Chase Hudson, our little Huddy on TikTok. God, what is her boyfriend? Noah Beck, and Larray. And all of them would post 6-way in-person collaborations pretty frequently throughout the year of 2020. And while these videos would always get a ton of views because people, again, were very invested in their friendships, even though I don't really think those friendships were real, especially like on camera, their chemistry is just so like bland. Like none of them even act like they like each other even a little bit in the videos. It's very strange. And while some people were super into this content, there was also groups of people who were heavily critical of it because it was still a pandemic. I think speaking purely from like a content perspective, it's super interesting to me that James Charles felt like he couldn't thrive without doing all of these collabs and couldn't thrive without having other people in his videos. There are tons of very successful YouTubers who basically just hold their own. They never really do collabs. They never really post with other people. Their main source of content is just them being themselves. And I think it's really telling and also really interesting because at this time, James was really, really praised for his creativity on YouTube because he was coming up with such different video concepts. But if you really think about it, I feel like the main time it would have been so awesome to prove your creativity and prove your content skills on YouTube would have been during a pandemic when you really just have to be completely alone and do everything yourself. If you look at most YouTubers' channels, you can really tell when the pandemic started happening, and you can really tell when it was hitting them because a lot of their content revolved around that, or a lot of their content became really solo all of a sudden, or people were doing like virtual things. James's channel, based on just thumbnails and titles, there's no way to tell when the pandemic actually began for him just by looking at his content because nothing about his content changed with the way that the world was changing. And I think this again, despite I know everything else that happened was like ultimately the downfall of James Charles, but when you talk about the scandals of James Charles, there are always things that are like little things that build up to be what the bigger problem ends up being. And I think that this was starting to really annoy a lot of people with the fact that James was incapable of just standing on his own and doing his own thing like every other YouTuber had to during the year of 2020. And also during 2020, this was when sort of Shane and Jeffree and Tati and everything from the Bi Sister scandal got resurfaced during the summer of this year. And James, for the most part, stayed really quiet. He didn't make a video on the topic. He didn't talk about it on Twitter. He mostly just like stayed silent and let everybody else sort of self-implode. And honestly, I think that was the smartest thing he could have done in that situation. Now, leading into 2021, despite a lot of the criticism that James was getting, he was also probably at like what I would say the peak in his career. He was getting pretty much 5 to 10 million views guaranteed on every single video. Some of them had even more, 15 to 20 million views. He was starting to get more mainstream recognition. Again, people were talking about him really favorably, and especially with the sort of downfall of Shane and Jeffree and Tati and all of that happening, I think that a lot of people felt that James Charles had really been vindicated and came out of the Bi Sister scandal as the winner. Like, especially going into 2021, if you asked people who they thought the winner was, they would say it was James Charles. In the eyes of the public, he had been completely acquitted of all of the allegations against him. However, in April of 2021, accusations started coming out against James that he had been messaging with minors. At the time, James was 21 years old, about to turn 22, and the first person who came forward alleging that they had had inappropriate conversations with him over Snapchat was 16 years old. James put out an initial statement when all of this started on Twitter where he basically denied some of it, but also confirmed some of it to be true. Basically, the detail that kept getting sort of missed in all of this was that the person alleging these things basically said James knew about their age and knew that they were 16 and continued with the conversation. And James claimed that the second he found out this person wasn't 18, he immediately stopped talking to them. Neither party has really shown evidence to say which side of that is true, but it doesn't really matter, at least in my opinion, if it's true or not true, how things went down, if James knew the person's age or not. Like, that's kind of irrelevant to me because regardless, he reached out to somebody who he knew was a fan of his and asked them to pretty much immediately send naked pictures. And then when they did, sent naked pictures back to that person, and that person ended up being a minor. Now, after this accusation went viral and a lot of people started talking about it, more and more people started coming forward saying they had very similar stories about James and similar experiences with James, and a lot of them them were minors. Now, at the time, Ethan Klein and Trisha Paytas were still doing frenemies, and I honestly think that frenemies was a large reason that these stories got traction in the first place. Ethan and Trisha reported on all of the new updates and all of the new stories and really talked about them at length as they were happening. And because of that, these stories were starting to get more traction, and James Charles was starting to get a lot more heat for these things. After his Twitter statement, he kind of kept posting on his channel and Twitter as if nothing had happened and as if those allegations hadn't have been made. Like, he just kind of tried to pretend that he had addressed it and that was adequate, even though in his Twitter response addressing it, he literally admitted to crimes. He kept trying to push forward as if nothing was wrong. But as more and more people started coming out and as more and more stories started to be told, James did make a video addressing the situation. In that video, which was called Holding Myself Accountable, which is now deleted, James did sort of admit to a lot of the things that were being said about him. He admitted to having inappropriate interactions with minors. And honestly, at that point, I think it was all over. I think that this coming out was not necessarily surprising to people, but I think it was really disheartening because there were these sort of allegations about him being thrown around during the Bi Sister scandal in 2019. And I think that a lot of people had felt that he had been cleared from that. So to hear that not only had he done this, but on top of that, that these were the same actions he had been accused of back in 2019. And that meant that these were sort of consistent patterns of behavior, like from 2019 to like 2021, for 3 years, he was abusing his power, aggressively speaking to other people and intimidating other people, trying to hook up with his fans, and also messaging with minors. After this video was posted, James left the internet for about a month and a half and then came back with a get ready with me. This was so dumb. He came back with a get ready with me where he basically, again, admitted to a lot of the stuff that was said about him, but also said that some of it wasn't true, and that even though he had receipts to vindicate himself, he wasn't going to use them. Just a mess. Like, honestly, this whole situation was such a mess, and it was so disgusting and disheartening because I think the worst part of it was not only was he trying to blame the victims in that situation and claim that they were the ones at fault, despite most of them being minors and him being the adult in the situation. Also, because of his massive platform of mostly young people, a lot of his fans were still really blindly supporting him and were sending hate and death threats and terrible messages to the accounts and the people that were coming forward about these stories with him. He did nothing to stop that. He did nothing to protect the people that he directly hurt. He just let it all happen. Now, after all of this happened, James definitely lost a lot of support. Initially, some of his friends from that like TikToker friend group still tried to support him. There were like paparazzi videos of them trying to defend him, but they've all quickly sort of left and abandoned him. And honestly, James's channel has really been suffering ever since he came back. He used to be able to easily pull in 5 to 10 million views a video, and now he's lucky if he can hit 2 million views. Things have definitely slowed down for him, and I definitely think a main reason for that is because of all of this and the allegations. I think people are just really done with him. I think people feel really betrayed by the fact that they believed him after the Bi Sister scandal and they stood by him, and then it turned out that he was just being a very predatory person behind the scenes. So I think that's a part of it, but I also think on top of that, and kind of what I just talked about, James Charles can't thrive without collaborators. Like, that was the main thing that he did on his channel, was collabing with other people. And now that he doesn't really have that, his videos are really suffering. I think the best example of sort of the fall of James Charles has to be his new video where he tries to recreate Squid Games. First of all, the video is just so ridiculously lazy. Like, just in general, it's an incredibly lazy video. But on top of that, he had a bunch of TikTokers and YouTubers in the video. I did not know a single one other than like Alex Warren and his girlfriend. That was the only one I knew. There were not any like super popular creators in this video. There were not any of the like top creators in this video. Creators that last year he could have pulled instantly were nowhere to be found. And I think that's because even if people want to privately support James, a lot of people are not willing to publicly support him right now because of these allegations, and they shouldn't. Nobody should be supporting James Charles right now. There are definitely still some influencers who are, and I think those influencers are on the wrong side of history with this. At the end of the day, despite all of the like petty scandals and the silly stuff that he got involved in, James just in the past 4 years has been racist, homophobic, sexist, had a massive ego that made him think he was like on top of the world, has been misogynistic towards primarily female creators in the beauty space, and on top of that has had predatory tendencies and has used his fame to manipulate minors into doing sexual things with him. He's not a good person. Like, I guess that's like the final thoughts on the evolution of James Charles. He's not a good person, and he really never has been. When I started this video, I really wanted to talk about how I felt like LA culture and, you know, fame changed James Charles as a person, but I don't think that's the story that's being told here. Like, I don't think LA or influencer culture or fame at a young age is to blame for this. I think the James Charles story more so shows what can happen when the wrong person becomes famous, when the wrong person gets an insane amount of power and privilege and money at a very young age, and the way that it's very easy for someone like James Charles to manipulate and abuse that power, money, and fame for self-serving reasons and get away with it for years. I think this, honestly, the only thing that's like sad about this, besides the fact that his victims will likely never get real justice because he still has his social media platform and YouTube actively still pushes and promotes all of his videos. But I think the other sad thing is that if James Charles had just gotten out of James Charles's way, he could have been a really prominent trailblazer in the beauty industry. He was one of the first really massive boys in makeup. He had so many opportunities, so many boys in beauty dream of having, and he just threw it all away basically for all of these really self-serving and gross reasons. It's like he can't just snap out of it and be like a decent person who's worthy of this platform, and I think that that's really gross and also unsettling and sad, because at the end of the day, his content is not bad. Like, his content is very creative. It's very interesting. He started a lot of trends on YouTube and was a trendsetter on YouTube for a long time. And honestly, what I think is crazy, and this is sort of unlike any other person that I've done an evolution of on, but the reason that James no longer has a follower base is not because his like content got stale or he got boring or he kind of grew out of his following or he wasn't able to evolve. It was none of those reasons. It was because he was a bad person, and that was the reason people couldn't support him anymore. Anyway, that was the evolution of James Charles. I'm sorry if this video was 10 hours long. I had a lot to say, but I hope you guys like this video. I hope you guys enjoy the evolution of James Charles. I am exhausted. I've just talked for like this. I think this was literally 4 hours of filming. This has been crazy, but I love you guys so much. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, or just like, or just subscribe, or do neither. Honestly, just so happy you're watching me. Thank you so much for being here. My merch, including my limited edition Glomus merch, my social media, and both of my other channels where I post daily during the month of December will be linked down below, along with my little social justice spotlight where you can look at ways to give back this holiday season. I love you guys so much, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!